This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica. I am your host, and today I am joined by Matt Bawler, who is Head of Early Years and he's also a teacher. Thank you, Matt, very much for joining and sharing this space with me.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to discuss growth mindset. And I think it would be great, Matt, for you to introduce yourself a little bit more, because there's a lot more that you do outside of kind of your main roles. So yeah, if you could just do that for us, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, sure. So I've been teaching for about 20 years and just over half of that has been in early years. Started off teaching older, but for me, I very quickly realized that it just bothered me how much effort and focus is on higher up the school, as in this like fixing and finishing strong. And I'm just like, why aren't we putting more effort into getting it right at the start? You know, so that was my journey in. And then just over the years that I've been in early years, which I love, I just discovered this sense of so much is decided in early years. You know, there's so much evidence coming out now within the realms of well-being, the impact, the lifelong impact that has and can have, both positively and negatively, sadly, for lifelong trajectory. And this was really what embarked me on this journey over the last probably about 6 or 7 years, in terms of specifically looking at, hang on a minute, rather than this sort of reactive wait until someone has a problem before we actually look at trying to do something about it, how can we be more proactive in the early years at that point where the neuroplasticity of the brain is at its height? This is the time when they're a vacuum and, you know, the thinking is so foundational. We be more proactive in actually empowering these children to do well. And yeah, I think we're going to talk about growth mindset a bit today, and that is one aspect of what I do within a wider circle that of positive mental health, proactive mental health, if you like, with early years, around sort of self-esteem, character, and resilience are the three areas that we work with, which we kind of teach it to the kids as I am, I can, and I will. But very much in terms of the resilience, the I will bit, that is very much growth mindset. And when I was first starting out, actually, that's the area that I started with, because I felt like this is an area that is just hugely lacking and actually is really important. So yeah, that's kind of my route in. I could talk about other things that I'm doing. I'm kind of working on taking this and building it into a website, because we're actually seeing a lot of exciting stuff happening with the families and the children that we're working with. So I'm looking to replicate that. But yeah.
That does sound quite exciting. There's a bit of a project then that's a lot wider than just kind of a day-to-day sort of focus.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sort of, I don't know. I mean, this is why I love what you do, is this element of, we are a team, we're a family, you know, we support each other in shared practice. And I think that's very much what I want to do, is go, look, there are some things here that I really think make a huge difference, both to our children, but also to us and our practice. And I would love to be able to share that both with staff and practitioners, but also with parents as well, because I think the more that we bring that shared language together of child, practitioner, parent, it just empowers everybody. So,
yeah, that triangulation is just so important, isn't it? And it's so vital to be able to have parents as actual partners, and not just, you know, these are people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. It's actually them being part of the settings as they are part of their own children's lives, and we as educators are part of their lives as well.
100%. It's so interesting to try and break down some of those barriers in a way. And you know, when I do a lot of training for teachers, but I also do a training for parents as well.
Okay.
And it's so interesting, the number of parents that come and say, gosh, I wish like we could really do the things you're doing with the kids. We could really do that ourselves. And I think that's where it's so lovely. I mean, I can talk about it a bit later in terms of growth mindset and some of the key phrases that we teach the kids. It's so funny when they start picking up their parents on things and being like, it's not, you can't do it. You just can't do it yet. And all this.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. So, so let's unpick growth mindset then. So what do you mean by growth mindset, or what's kind of commonly known as the growth mindset? How would we define it?
Well, so I'm conscious that, people listening to this will be coming from different angles and experience. For those of you that haven't heard of growth mindset before, it largely came from a brilliant lady called Carol Dweck, who I would really recommend if you are new to her. She wrote a book called Mindset, which I think everybody should read. And this is not just used in schools. She actually initially wrote it very much from a business and adult point of view, but it's very much something that is applicable for schools. So she was very interested in mindset, in this idea of the way that you see yourself, the way that you view yourself and your world plays a massive part in how you interact with yourself and with your world. And the idea that came with growth mindset is that sometimes we can be of the opinion that we can be quite fixed. So whether that's in terms of your abilities, it's this nature-nurture debate, this idea that are some people naturally born with skills, or is it something you learn? And basically a fixed mindset is where you feel like, this is you, and you're either good at something or you're not. And, I think the way I would describe that with grown-ups is, how often do you think the phrase, oh, I'm not good at that? And I think if, for me, it was for a long time, and I still do have it, is maths. And this I just have this sense of,
it's exactly what I was thinking just now. And
actually that came from a teacher when I was younger, just going, oh, you're a lot better at English, aren't you? And that simple phrase, you're a lot better at English, I took that on board, and that became very much part of my mindset for years and years, that I just was like, I'm not good at maths. And it stopped me engaging with it. And growth mindset is basically the notion that no matter who you are, no matter where your starting point, you can always get a good deal better. And I think that for children is such a foundational thing to learn, particularly in the early years. As you are approaching new learning, what is your mindset towards learning? Is it focused on, am I going to can I do this or can I not? Is it a very fixed mindset of, I can do it, I can't do it? Or is this actually, this is a journey, this is a process. This is where I am now, and I'm going to get better and I'm going to grow. And I think it can be really releasing, actually, for children to step back from this kind of very fixed mindset thinking of, I'm good at something. And even I often challenge teachers and parents to think about the words that we use with our children, because are you, when you praise children, for example, are you praising the product or the process? Are you saying to your child, you're a genius, you're clever? Or are you saying, you tried really hard at that, well done, you got it? And it's such a simple shift, but basically when you say to a child, you're a genius or you're brilliant at maths, actually what you're kind of doing is giving them a bit of a label. And that seems great, but actually what that actually sometimes encourages is safety rather than risk, because they're thinking, well, I'm quite happy with this label, I'm good at maths. What happens when they try something and they can't do it? What happens is they actually edge back towards the safety of keeping the label. Whereas someone that knows that they're getting praised for effort, whether they're actually getting it straight away or not, will always go after stuff. And Carol Dweck did this. Sorry, I'm like, I could waffle on about it today. I'm sorry.
It's great.
Carol Dweck did this really fascinating experiment. If you've not looked it up, you should just Google Carol Dweck experiments. And she did this one that she's replicated across the world with multiple age groups, multiple socioeconomic backgrounds. And she's found the same thing every time, where she took two groups, so, two groups of equal age children, and got them to do a puzzle. And the first puzzle was kind of quite relatively easy that anyone could do, and at the end of it, half the group, they said, wow, you're great at that, you're a genius, well done, do you want to try another one? And to the other group, they said, you tried really hard at that, well done, would you like to try another one? And then the next puzzle that they gave them was way harder. And the group that had been told, you're really good at this, when it was hard, they gave up, and they're like, actually, I don't think I can do this. And also, when they were asked, do you want another hard one, or do you want to go back to the easy one? 90% said, actually, I'd rather go back to the easy ones. Whereas the other group, it was something like 85% of them stuck with it and did the harder one. And also, when they were asked, do you want to go back to those ones, or do you want to do more harder ones? They said, yeah, we want to do harder ones. And, that's what I want to be getting into the kids that I teach, is this element of growth mindset of, it's not easy, it doesn't come hard, but that's part of it. We teach them things like, when something's hard, rather than going, oh, it's hard, it's like, great, this is hard. We love a challenge. Actually, that's one of the, I can talk. One of the things that I try to do is take this conceptual thing of growth mindset and actually try and break it down into a way that is more meaningful for early years, but also going up through with a bit of a kind of growing trajectory as they go up into key stage 1 as well. And part of that has been informed by some of the stuff I've read around neuroscience, and when the brain is going into fight, flight, or freeze, and the amygdala is kicking in, when something goes wrong or you face a challenge, your hippocampus and your prefrontal cortex, like your access to logical thinking, and your hippocampus, your access to memory, shuts down because of the amygdala. And at that point, when you're going into that, you need something that can cut through in a very kind of habitual neural pathway thinking that is simple but powerful. And so we started over the last 4 years using these phrases that we call them memory books. Essentially, in the same way that, if I said twinkle, twinkle, little, straight away your brain just gives you star, or old MacDonald. Farm is there because it's an embodied response. It's so just, you've said it out loud so many times that it becomes an internalized response, and it's just there like that. And so we have built up these sort of series of phrases that we teach the children. Things like, I can't do it yet. It's not when you have that thing of, oh, I can't do it. It's actually, hang on a minute. It's not you can't do it. You just can't do it yet. Or we teach them the value of mistakes. And one of the phrases that mistakes are great. And, I think for children, that is such a powerful thing for them to get this idea that mistakes are part of that journey, but the steps to get there. And, there's this great lie that learning should be the equivalent of, like in golf, like a hole in one, that the norm should be a hole in one, that every time you learn something, you should just get it. And I think the more children understand that learning is a process of discovery, and more like a treasure map, in a way of going backwards, forwards to get there. And so, we celebrate in our class mistakes, and I model it. When I make a mistake, I'm like, oh, is that a bad thing? And they'll be like, no. So they're on the wall above me here. So like, I love a challenge. There's these things that, what's so lovely is we're at the point now where not only are they kind of taking it on for themselves, but there's this real empowerment for each other. And it's so lovely to watch when they catch each other and they're like, hey, catch that negative thought, like that's a mistake. Mistakes are great. Come on, it's not you can't do, you just can't do it yet. And it's just the most wonderful thing to sit back and watch 3, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds really engaging with this. They're not afraid to go after learning. And I think that's where growth mindset can be really powerful within the early years context. I think it fits into quite a few of the 7 areas. So in terms of the 3 core areas, PSED, I think it's huge in that, but also in terms of communication and language, the way that you're able to communicate with yourself as well as, this is a thing that I find really interesting. So much of communication and language talks about how we communicate with others. And
that's a good point.
Is how we communicate with ourselves. And actually this element of being able to step back and observe, I think the more children understand that they're not their thoughts or their feelings, but the observer of them, it empowers them to kind of go, actually, hang on a minute, what am I feeling? How can I communicate this to others? And that I'm not stuck. I think that's where growth mindset plays a really big part of it.
And that internal dialogue it's so important to tap into, isn't it? And it's so empowering to be able to have all these little phrases and key terms to be able to kind of bring them to the forefront and share with others and also say them to yourself. And it's just, when you were describing it and how the children are and your experience is all very positive, and there's just so much kind of positivity there. And I think when you were also saying about, in terms of modeling, that is so important to model to children. I think it just really reminded me that of that term that I use a lot, actually, lifelong learning. And it's so important to really embed that in the early years, because then they carry that through with them. And that mindset that you don't have to know everything, and you're never going to know everything, in the ins and outs. So you've always got more to learn. So I think sometimes what I've experienced in my practice before is parents coming to me saying, and my child just asked me a difficult question. I have no idea what the answer is. What should I say? I don't know what to say. And I would say you don't know. It's fine to not know. And say, let's research it together. And I've said this many times, and parents kind of are taken aback and think, but we're the adults, we're the educators, we should know the answers. But it's modeling that it's okay to not know.
100%. I really rate that. I think that is one of the most wonderful experiences, when a child is able to experience teaching you something. Or discovering together, and just be like, do you know what? I don't know. Shall we find out? That's the early years through and through. That of characteristics of effective learning. I don't know that yet, and the yet bit, is just so wonderful. And I do agree with you that this element of lifelong learning is what we want. One of the things that bugs me is the way that education is so separated these days into kind of like early years, and then they're just kind of like chucked on, and then it's like primary, then and now they're just and it's like, actually, why can't we have slightly more of a joined up approach of lifelong learners? What do we want? And I think, as early years practitioners, it's so important that we understand that what we are doing is actually setting the foundations for life, not just for the years that we have them. And the influence that we have is so huge. But yeah, it's lovely for parents to discover the freedom of not having to know everything, and that they can make mistakes, and that actually, I've had a number of parents really come back to me and say, do you know what? I really value, I got something wrong, and I apologized to my son about it. And we have this really stronger bond now, because I was able to go, do you know what? I made a mistake there, but I'm going to learn from it. And
that's so nice.
Yeah. And I think
it really, I was just going to say, it really reduces that pressure off parents or carers or families as well, because they have a lot of that pressure from perhaps themselves and maybe even others, often, being especially a new parent, and not necessarily knowing exactly what the right thing might be or the best thing might be. And having that mindset of, well, it's okay to make those mistakes, it's not the end of the world, is really healthy for them as well, and their mental health as parents and carers, and then passing that on to the children. Just quickly, I wanted to thank all the listeners for tuning into the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Those of you who are regular listeners will know that a new episode comes out every Monday morning, ready for your commute, morning coffee, or that reflective start to the week to get you thinking and in the zone. If you haven't already done so, it would really help this podcast to keep going if you subscribe to the channel that you're listening on. The Voice of Early Childhood podcast can be found on 19 different podcast platforms and on YouTube. So it's highly likely that you, your friends, and colleagues can find it on your favorite streaming platform. So please do hit the subscribe button, and this will help us to keep putting out thought-provoking, reflective, and insightful episodes with a wide range of guests. Thank you. I'll let you get back to the episode now.
Yeah, asking for help, I think, is a really much sort of unspoken name in a way, which I hate. Mm-hmm. This notion of you need to sort of present that you got it together and you know what you're doing, both to your kids, but also to like other parents. And one of the things that I'm always trying to push as well is this idea of it's not me and my child, it's us and our children. And the more that we can break down this barrier, actually we grow together as a school, not just as parent to parent, but as a school. The more that we can say, look, we don't have to have it all together. We can, and obviously we aim high and we want to get it right. But if you don't, great. What can you learn from it? How can we do it better next time? Those kind of vibes.
And it's that community kind of mindset, isn't it? And that's so powerful. And losing instead of winning can actually teach you a lot more. And it's important to be able to really encourage children to think in that way, that you don't necessarily have to win all the time. It's healthy to be, I guess, a good loser, but actually think I've learned something from losing rather than, getting something from winning. You often get a lot more from losing.
100%. And there's a few things that I'd say about that in terms of, the neuroscience that I often teach with the kids is this element of, it's been scientifically proven that you actually learn more from making a mistake and learning from it than you do from getting something right first time, because when your neurons are being fused together with the synapse, like building a bridge, and we teach it to the kids as build that bridge. When you make a mistake, you're actually and contemplating it and what you can learn, you're fusing and making that bridge so much stronger. That neural connection is fused in a much stronger way than if you just got it right first time. So actually making mistakes are really important. And interestingly, like what you said about failure and losing, I think that's a really important thing as well. There's one of my favorite growth mindset. I talk to the children a lot about different examples of people in history. There's this thing that people in history are presented as like, oh, they didn't ever make a mistake. And actually the vast majority of people that have ever done anything big, if you look back in their history, there were pivotal points where they really got things wrong and they learned from that. And that's what led to them succeeding. And then Josh, I think it's Josh Waitzkin, I think his name is. He was a world champion chess player. And he decided that he was going to retrain in something new. And it was, I think it was judo. He also went on to taekwondo as well, but judo initially. And he basically, the reason within a very short space of time, close to a year, he had become the world champion. And people were like, how on earth have you done that? And he basically said, I love to lose. And he said, I learned so much more going into every competition, looking to lose and going, right, what did I learn from that? Great. What did I learn from that? Great. And he actually learned way quicker than anyone else because he had this attitude of, actually, I really like actually looking for how, when I got things, how that makes me grow.
Looking at those details and thinking, what could I have done better there? Yeah. And, it's so interesting that you mentioned taekwondo, actually, because I do taekwondo and I am an instructor as well. And when I said that example earlier, in terms of losing, in my head, I had mainly the kind of picture of taekwondo competitions. And quite recently, actually, I said to my little brother, he's not so little now, he's 15, but he did kind of, I think he might have came second in a competition. And I was just trying to kind of get his, motivation up a little bit, because he was down about not winning. So I did say, look how much you can learn from losing, because you can see what you could, what you might have been able to do differently, what you could have done against your opponent, what you could do next time. So yeah, it's just that kind of unpicking of these situations and tapping into, what have I done here? How can I have done it differently? And it's all these critical thinking skills, really, isn't it?
It's very much the critical thinking and how it fits into a broader picture. I think growth mindset is really powerful in itself, but also when it keys into other elements of the self-esteem and character. I think actually the self-esteem, this element of how I see myself, and the character is the sort of the skills to be able to engage in my world. And say, like the example of your brother, I think when we build children up to this element of your sense of self-worth is built on whether you win or lose. That can be quite damaging, because everything is dependent on what happens, and I am either enough because I've won, or I'm not. And actually, when we build in, I don't think competition is a bad thing. I think competition is a great thing when we challenge ourselves and go for it. But when we root our sense of self-worth in whether we win or not, that's when it's a problem. And actually, when we're going, I am me and I am fully enough as I am, and in that I step forward to challenge myself and go after being the best that I can, that is when we are then more in a place to be able to go, I lost. I'm so annoyed that I lost. I'm allowed to feel sad. I think kids need to know they're allowed to feel sad. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But then it's this element of, and what can I learn from it?
Yeah. And I think you're right. It can be can be very detrimental, actually, for children when they are encouraged to win, and there's too much pressure. They need to be encouraged to take part, the whole thing of like, it's a take part that counts. But like you say, it is,
isn't it? Because it's like half of that feels a bit consolation. I think it's sort of somewhere in the middle. I think, or maybe it's both. I think that element of actually it is this celebration of being part of something, but it's this element of we don't win all the time, and actually that's part of the fun. Actually, if you just won every time, it would get very boring. And actually, part of the gratification is when you don't win, and then you do, you really feel it. And it's somewhere in that middle bit of, I don't think we should be too cotton woolly with our kids, because I think there is something over the last few years where there's been this element of like, protect kids at all costs. And actually, I don't think it's helpful. I think kids need to fall. Kids need to know what it is to hurt themselves so that they can get back up and figure out their boundaries and take risks. And we don't want to be too cotton woolly, because we do them a disservice. But it's something about how we frame it. And also, I think Minet Conquerberg talks a lot about co-regulation. And I think for me, that is key is this element of we expect sometimes too much of our kids to just be able to know stuff, or to automatically know how to handle difficult emotions, or and actually it's this element of consistent modeling co-regulation and slowly working towards self-regulation. And I think with growth mindset, that's a prime example. You model it. You then help a child to come through when they've made a mistake with their art and they want to screw it up and chuck it. You sit with them and you co-regulate and you breathe and you help them to go, actually, hang on a minute. What can we learn from this? Mistakes are okay. We can do it, and building them up to the point where they then independently do it. I think a lot of that can be done with competition as well, where that element of growth mindset of where am I at and how can I go the next step? What's the next step for me?
And if they know what it feels like and how to regulate in a situation when they have lost or made a mistake, then they're prepared for making mistakes and losing in the future, because they will always come across difficult situations where they're losing or making mistakes. And we do see children often who have rarely lost or made mistakes, and are kind of, I guess, prevented from losing or making mistakes and guarded from that, like you say, wrapped in cotton wool, perhaps. And then they don't know how to respond when they do face a difficult situation. Yeah, they plummet, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not serving them. It's so hard when you see someone struggling, your instant desire is that you want to fix it and take it away. And it's like that's a very short-term fix and great, but actually how much better to empower them and get alongside them and co-regulate and help them to see, actually, no, I can do this for myself. And that's where the self-esteem comes in from. So much of self-esteem is repeated experience. And so resilience and growth mindset through repeated experience, this element of actually, I can do this, and actually I did do it. And, those are the stories that we can frame that go into that sense of self-esteem. This, I didn't give up, I kept going and I achieved it. That builds their sense of self, and that then releases them to go into character and be like, actually, I've got a sense of myself. How I can now engage with my world in a more confident way.
Yeah, and that actually, I had a very recent experience with a child last week. I went to volunteer at Derby Kids Camp, and it was a little girl who was before the camp, she was really unsure about going, and I think she'd actually previously been, but she was just quite nervous. And some of the volunteers actually reminded her of a previous experience where she went somewhere new and she wasn't sure about it, but actually she really enjoyed it, and they kind of made that example. And straight away she was like, oh yeah, and I did this last year and I enjoyed it. And when I tried this new thing, I really enjoyed it as well. So it's that reminder, like you say, that, this scenario happened before and I succeeded, or this scenario happened before and I didn't win, but it was fine and I enjoyed it still, or I learned something. And it's building up on those experiences, isn't it?
Then it slowly over time becomes an embodied experience where those neural pathways that can be strengthened. If your neural pathway, when something goes wrong and your neural pathway is straight to then it will all do that. Whereas if over time you really start to strengthen one in a different direction towards, actually, it will be okay. That's your response. And it's, how exciting to be able to play a part in that.
What I was going to mention, actually, I've just taken a few notes from what you were saying earlier. I think it was around that kind of I will and I can kind of mindset, that resilience, and I can do this. That you were saying all these phrases, and that's around gender roles and stereotypes. I think this comes in here in terms of often we may experience girls saying, I can't play football, it's a boys thing, etc., and vice versa. All these kinds of unhealthy stereotypes, and breaking them down is really important. And I think this mindset that you're talking about with those healthy kind of phrases that you teach your children, to say that I can't do this yet, or I will be able to do this. That's just so healthy, and breaking down those barriers as well, to say that, you can do anything, you can do everything, you can learn. Just because it's not the norm perhaps, or you haven't seen like a girl do this before, there's not many boys doing this activity, it doesn't mean you can't.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting thing, this sort of you can do anything vibe. It's sort of like, actually, there can be sometimes where you will hit a ceiling, but it's about going after it. And why not go after it? And I think that's the shift. Is it's not going to be easy, and challenge things and go after them. And I think particularly in terms of challenging some of those gender normative stereotypes. I think it's really wonderful to kind of go, actually, yeah, who are you not to try this? And you know, I love that element within class where, again, the sort of child empowerment aspect, where they're starting to get to that point now where I'm reading a story and you'll get them calling out and being like, hang on a minute, that's not fair, you know, actually
yeah.
You can do whatever you want. And it's that, yeah, I think it's the notion of thinking and questioning, and that you don't have to accept the norms. And again, similar to what we were talking about earlier about the lifelong learners, moving away from this idea that me adult, me expert, you shut up and take what I'm telling you, like, you know, this kind of like
that authoritative top down.
I'm going to tell you what knowledge is and you're going to take it on. I just think that's such a archaic, unhelpful sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than this sense of, actually, you have the ability to think beyond what I'm saying. And actually what I'd love for you to do is listen to what I'm saying and think about, what does it mean for you? And how can you challenge yourself now? How can you move yourself forward for you? Definitely things like encouraging boys and girls in separate ways of stepping outside of expectations, and sometimes from parental unconscious and stuff that can come there. So,
and in terms of kind of those power dynamics with the adults often kind of being all knowing, and, you know, those archaic views that you mentioned, that's why I always really kind of think of the Reggio Emilia approach, and, you know, the adults and children being co-researchers. It always makes me think of that initially. And I know there's other approaches and theories out there that also kind of encourage that kind of thing. But I just think it's great that in that approach specifically, they see children and adults on the same level. And like you said earlier, you know, learning from each other and researching together and being on the same kind of playing field. You know, there aren't those kind of power dynamics.
Yeah, I really hope long term that education I mean, there's a lot of encouraging conversations going on right now. And in terms of the sort of Victorian model of knowledge is power is becoming outdated, and actually what can best serve our children as they grow into their world that they inherit, and actually more of a skills-based adaptability learning of being able to, you know, it's less what you know, but how you know it and how you're able to adapt, and
what you do with that knowledge, I guess, as well, isn't it? Really, that's the key thing, isn't it?
And I hope that, for me, one of the most important things is that early years is part of that conversation, because I don't know whether I'm speaking out of turn, but a lot of those conversations tend to happen in the secondary schools and the sort of upper primary, and it's like actually we need key voices championing early years, not just in our sort of early years bubble. And I think rightly so, because we've been so maligned for so many years that we've had to almost turn inward to support each other to keep going. But I just feel like something of that outward facing bridge building of actually we really need to be in those circles and saying, look, if you're reshaping education, start with early years. You know, this is my whole thing around positive mental health and well-being. So many conversations at the minute are about secondary school and, you know, dealing with the mental health crisis. And I'm like, if you could just understand that what you're doing is really important, but it's essentially firefighting. And until you can step back and proactively empower young children to be equipped with the skills, not just to be able to cope when life's challenges, but to be able to, you know, even thrive beyond that, that's where we need to be putting all of our attention. And I think early years has a huge role to play, and we need to be engaging in that, I think.
And I think we, as early years educators and advocates, we need to be actively advocating for that. I always kind of use that term, you know, active advocates. It's not just about us talking to ourselves, like you said, you know, we're preaching to the converted so much of the time, and we really need to be going out in those wider communities outside of our own sector in order to shout about more about what the early years is, what we're doing. And well, that's why I created the Voice of Early Childhood. And that's why you're doing what you're doing, with all the wider work.
Really doing. I think the more people can support that the voice, that speaking out, so often early years is seen as like the abyss at the bottom of the ocean, is the way I describe it. It's like this sort of mystical thing that no one really knows what happens down there. And it's actually to bring these out, but also to take, you realize the impact that you could have on your older kids through focusing on this. So yes, the more people that can support you in what you're doing, the better.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, I think it's a nice kind of place to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Matt. It was so interesting hearing your kind of definition, I guess, and your research into the growth mindset and all of the kind of theory behind it as well. But then also you putting it into practice and all the fantastic things that you're doing with your children and your team. So yeah, it's been really lovely having you on.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I am aware that I've kind of just randomly blurted out a load of stuff there. So I don't know at some of the blogs that I've written. If anyone would be interested in reading more about growth mindset in a bit more logical detail, or how it fits into this broader context of mental health, maybe if I share those with you.
Yeah, definitely. Right. That would be brilliant. And so our listeners can find out more about the work that Matt does and a little bit more about the growth mindset on the Voice of Early Childhood website. So thank you very much, Matt, for being on the podcast. And I'm sure we'll hear from you very soon on the Voice of Early Childhood again.
I would love that. Thank you for having me on.
Mm-hmm.